are at a time of new beginnings. Did you know that? New beginnings. Seems a little counterintuitive. You know, it's really cold outside. There's snow on the ground. The trees are, you know, pretty bare, and what leaves are on the trees are all dead and brown. But yet, this is a time of new beginnings, even though the calendar says that December, that we're entering into tomorrow, is the last month of the year. In the ancient times, and even more recent times, this time of year was honored as a time of new beginnings. This is entering into the time of the winter solstice, when the new sun is reborn into a new year. And in fact, even in the Christian liturgical calendar, back when, in the early Catholic traditional liturgical calendar, they started their year of liturgy in Advent, which is the 4 Sundays before Christmas, which today would be the first Sunday of Advent. So many cultures have celebrations at this time of year that center around light. And I find it fascinating that, you know, we have all these different cultural celebrations in the deepest, darkest time of year, where we have this need, this almost inborn desire to celebrate the rebirth of the light to come. And yet this is something that is born within us. We all have this. We have, you know, of course there's Christmas, which is the birth of Jesus, who was called the light of the world. We have the birth of the sun in the pagan tradition. We have the celebration of Buddha's enlightenment. Enlightenment. That's not a word that you think of with light, but it is light. It is all light. The Hindu festival of lights is called Diwali, and that also happens usually in November, somewhere around there. We seem to be hardwired with that desire to celebrate the light, even in the darkness. And for me, this time of year feels like a womb time. Feels like a time of preparing for birth. And having been a birth doula for a number of years and having studied to become a midwife at one point, that symbolism of birth is really, it resonates very deeply with me. But the reason why it resonates with me is because it is a new creation. So it's a time of creation. It's a beginning time. And so even though it's going to sound a little churchy, I really wanted to talk today a little bit about the Judeo-Christian creation story, the creation of light. So I'm going to read that for you to start off. In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. That passage didn't really resonate with me too much growing up in Mennonite church, but after I read a little bit of Thomas Troward, who was a huge influence for Ernest Holmes, who wrote The Science of Mind. Thomas Troward wrote a book called Bible Mystery, Bible Meaning, and I took a class on this way back when, and it changed everything for the way I looked at this particular passage, because what this is, in metaphysical terms, this is a poem. This is a beautiful, imagery-rich poem that is also a set of instructions for how we create in our lives. And so I love that idea of it being a poem, and I love the idea that these concepts in this one passage show up in our spiritual mind treatment or positive prayer. So I'm going to go through it a little bit and just go over that with you so that you understand what I'm talking about. So firstly, we begin with God. In the beginning, God. First 4 words. There's only one thing. That thing is God, or Spirit, or Creator, or Source, however we want to name that. There's only one thing, and all is created from this one thing, both the heaven and the all is created. And the next line says, the earth was without form and void. Void meaning it's empty. And it has to be without form because at that point it hadn't been created. It was a formless thought. This is the stage of all potential. This is where anything is possible. And the next line says, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep. That's the darkness. That's that womb time, that quiet inner time, that void. And the deep refers to that primordial spiritual substance from which everything is created. And you could call that energy or essence or stardust or life or soul. It's that creative substance. And many cultures have the same image of creation arising out of a vast ocean. So this is the same image that we have in this particular poem. And the next line is, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And this is my favorite line because the poetry of it just appeals to me. And what Thomas Troward said is that spirit doesn't have form, so therefore the only movement of spirit is thought. So when it says the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters, really what it says is that spirit is thinking its desire into the movement of the waters, into moving that spiritual substance into form. And the next line is, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. God speaks its word, and the word is created into form. And so just to look at those steps, first I acknowledge that there is only God. There's only spirit or creative source, whatever name I choose to call. And knowing that, I know that I am part of that one thing because all is created from that one thing, both the heaven and the earth. And then I formulate that which I desire into a thought which moves and shifts the spiritual substance of my life. And then I speak my word definitively with conviction. And because I am one with spirit, I know that my word becomes form. God said, let there be light, and there was light. The next line says, and God saw the light, that it was good. Because even God, within its own infinite self, recognizes the good. So this is our blueprint for spiritual mind treatment. And isn't that fantastic that it's created in that one short passage, that one short piece of poetry within a book that has become a spiritual blueprint for the world. So the first thing that's created is light. And I think that's fascinating too, because everything else has to be created from that. Everything else has to flow from that creation of light. And quantum physics would agree with that. Quantum physics would agree that light is the essence of everything, because they say when you go back to the tiniest of tiniest of tiniest particles of matter, that it's really all energy, and the space is in between the energy. So there is the light, the energy, and the void, the darkness, all within every tiny particle of creation. And I find that to be fascinating and beautiful. So from the void is created light. That is the first thing. And from there, everything flows. And the next line says, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day and the darkness night. In the Taoist tradition, this would be where they would talk about the creation of the yin and the yang. This is an acknowledgement that there is darkness and light within everything. That light and shadow is within all things. And so if we accept that creation came from the darkness into the and moved into the light, then we know that if that happens spiritually, as above, so below, then that also happens physically. And so we have this beautiful physical representation of that creative principle, that we have the darkness that flows into the light. And the last line that says, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And that, of course, is affirming that we start with the evening, and that from there we go into the morning. So I love that passage. I love that passage. So I recently read a blog post by a man named Aaron Moss, and he talked about why Jewish holidays always start in the evening. And he said really the day, the course of the day in Jewish tradition starts in the evening, and it comes from that passage. And what he wrote is this: the Jewish view is clear, and it was evening and it was morning, first the night, then the day. Darkness is a pathway to the sunrise hiding behind it. A challenge comes our way only to help us tap into and reveal our inner powers that have until now remained unfathomed. That's Jewish time, the comfort in knowing that no matter how dark it may seem, it is light that will have the last word. And I thought that was beautiful. So this creation poem points to a really important, powerful truth for us at this time of the year. We are in the darkening months of the year. We are going into the darkest part of the year, which is the winter solstice, when the day is very short and the night is very long. And at this time of year, this is a time where we inwardly create, we inwardly plant the seeds for where we're going, we inwardly light the candle for where we're going, as that song said, as Gary sang before. So I've come to see Christmas as really being another time of creation. It's the time of creation of that Christ consciousness within us, that time of raising that up within us to know that there is always light, even in the darkest of the times of the year. So these winter months are very powerful for me. They always have been. And what I see is that the summer months are the time when we do the outward work. And the winter months, when we're in that darkening time of year, that's where we do the inner work. And that inner work is so very powerful because it's the seeds that we plant at this time. It's the light that we shine and nurture at this time that grows into our lives for the rest of the year. And so this is a beautiful and powerful time of deepening for me. And so each year I find a way to honor that deepening. And this year I decided that I wanted to honor Advent. This is something I haven't really done since I was a little child. And I decided that this would be a good year to do that. And so Advent in the Christian calendar is the four Sundays before Christmas, and in the pagan calendar is the 4 Sundays before winter solstice. So either way, there's many different ways that you can look at that. But either way, we are at the first Sunday of Advent today. So this is my time to delve into a new spiritual practice. So what Advent means is the coming. It's simply an acknowledgement of the anticipation of the goodness and light to come. And it's that goodness and light that is within the Christ consciousness that is reborn within us each year, that is reborn within us each time that we choose to acknowledge it. And so it's that grateful anticipation of goodness which is key to our ability to create within our own lives. We know that in our spiritual mind treatments, one of the things that we do is we nurture that sense, we empower that sense of grateful anticipation within us, because that is a powerful tool for us in creating in our own lives. So this is the time of year when we do that. And this is a good time for me to remember that in my own life. So I read an article on reliefnet.com. It's called Diary of a Former Pagan Celebrating Advent as a Catholic. And it's by Carl McColman. And it's a brilliant article, and I felt so inspired by it, so I decided I wanted to read you parts of it. So I'm just going to read some excerpts for you. The first part he talks about is really one of the most interesting things to me. He says, Advent is subversive. And I thought, wow, okay, I already like this guy. Advent is subversive. It subverts the breakneck pace of our instant gratification, gotta have it now society. The closest many people come to the power of Advent is making sure the kids don't open the presents under the tree before the morning of the 25th. Wait until Christmas. That's not too far from the real message of Advent. Wait, be patient. Find meaning and joy in the not yet times of life. I thought that was wonderful. And then he goes on to say, After spending so much time in the goddess community, I love it that Advent is all about honoring a pregnant mother-to-be. No one forces a baby to be born now just because the impending birth is so exciting. Instead, we wait with joyful anticipation, and perhaps with impatient excitement, but however we feel, we wait anyway. Advent is a brief season for reminding us that such waiting has its own beauty and spiritual value, and that's true for everyone, no matter what your faith. He says, like every other treasure of Christianity, the symbolism of Advent tells us little about its deep inner meaning. Advent is about waiting, waiting for the birth, waiting for the fullness of time when the mystery will be revealed. It's not just about a birth in a Bethlehem manger that in any case has already happened long ago. He's coming from a very Catholic standpoint here. Rather, Advent makes the pregnancy and the waiting real, here and now. We are all like Mary, pregnant with the Christ child in our own hearts and minds and souls. We are all waiting, waiting for a second coming, whether you see that as some sort of dramatic denouement in history or more humble and powerful transformation that occurs inside a person, one individual at a time. We observe Advent to honor Mary, and we venerate Mary in part because of her plenitude of grace. The Archangel Gabriel called Mary full of grace, he writes, and anyone who ever prays the Rosary repeats that simple appellation dozens of times. So does Mary actually function as a conduit of divine grace? Advent dares us to consider that maybe that grace was already in evidence, even before Christ's birth, which is, of course, something that we know to be true, that grace has always been present. So as I read this, thinking about the two almost diametrically opposed spiritual expressions that he's had in his life, coming from paganism, which is very earthbound, goddess-based spirituality, to Catholicism, which is very much rooted and embedded in a deep Christian faith, then those two different viewpoints coming together was so interesting to me as to how he interpreted this time of year. And so I thought to myself that I could reinterpret this time of year for myself as well. So what I decided to do was just to draw on a few spiritual practices that I'm going to honor this Advent for myself. So the first one is waiting, patience, allowing for and honoring the time in the darkness for myself, allowing and honoring for that time of quiet, that time of peace, that time in the void before anything dramatic happens. That takes faith and trust. And it's not something that we're very used to, waiting. And we don't always think that we should have to wait. But this idea of waiting has deep value for me. So this past week, the universe decided that it would help me to learn how to wait a little bit better. And so in a very dramatic fashion, I thought, we had 3 power outages. So we were left in the dark, waiting for the light, 3 times this past week. The first time was just before bed, and so it was nighttime, and I was up for half the night. It took about 4 hours for the power to go back on, and I was up for half the night wondering, is the power going to go back on? Is it going to get really cold in here? Am I going to freeze overnight? I mean, how is this going to work? Our furnace doesn't go on. I don't know, how this is going to work. So I was very concerned, and I didn't sleep very well for that night. The second time, I learned to be a little bit more faithful. I learned that the lights will come back on, that the power will be restored. And so I did sleep that night. And I just, hunkered in under the covers. And about 5 hours after the power went out, it came back on. And then the third time was the most powerful time for me. It was Friday evening, and it was only about 5 in the evening, and Steph was going to be going out for a couple of hours, and all of a sudden the power is out, and it's fairly cold outside. And we didn't have the wood stove going, so Steph put some wood in the wood stove, got it going, and said, okay, you're going to have to tend the fire. Well, Steph is the firekeeper in our family, so this was a new experience for me. And so she left, and I had a few candles, and I had my dogs and my cats sort of all sleeping around me, and I waited. And while I was waiting, I tended the fire a little bit, made sure that it kept going. And while I waited, I decided to put a pot of water on top of the wood stove so that I could boil water to make tea, which I found out in the size of pot that I use takes about an hour. But I waited. And I sat there once I had my tea in the darkness with just my few little candles and realized what a powerful, beautiful gift of meditation time that was for me. Time of contemplation, when there was nothing that I had to do. I just had to wait. So my next spiritual practice is joyful anticipation. Because, you know, we're not just waiting. We're waiting for something wonderful. We're waiting for that rising up, that renewal of Christ consciousness within us, that renewal of the light within us. This is our time of inward preparation. So just as I was, poking at the fire a little bit, keeping it going, and putting a pot of water on, this is our time of inward preparation. And so what is anticipation? Well, when we anticipate, we imagine what it will be, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like. And that powerful feeling tone of knowing what it is that it's going to look like, that informs our ability to create. That opens up our ability to create what we want in our lives. And this is, again, what we do in spiritual mind treatment. We awaken that sense of joyful, grateful anticipation within us. It's that time when we metaphorically put out the decorations in our mind and string the lights in our mind, knowing that the celebration is to come, that our time of light is coming. So it takes a little bit of faith that there is going to be that celebration, that there is going to be that time of light to come, even when we are in the darkened months. So this feeling of joyful anticipation, that fostering that, is an important spiritual practice for me. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do. And the third one was just an awareness of grace. An awareness that Spirit is ever giving of itself. And in this Catholic gentleman's article, he talked about Mary being a conduit for grace. And what it struck me is that Mary wouldn't be a conduit of grace because she was the only one that God could create through. Mary was ordinary. She was just like everybody else. She wasn't anything special. And so, if Mary is a conduit of grace that could bring forth the Christ consciousness into the world, then each one of us is a conduit of grace bringing forth the Christ consciousness within ourselves. We all have that within us. And what grace really is simply our assurance that when I say, let there be light in my life, that there is light. That there is light because Spirit is ever giving of itself. And I know I have that assurance that Spirit is ever giving into my life. And so it's that grateful assurance that is the awareness of grace for me. And that is so important. And so at this time of year, as we're looking inward, when we're looking into that inner light and awakening that within us, this time of year becomes a powerful time for us in the spiritual practice. And it also becomes a powerful time for us to remember that this light that we are growing within us is also growing within the world. And so regardless of the dark things that we see happening in the world around us, and we've seen plenty, and I know there's been a lot in the news even recently, but regardless of what we see happening in the world, we know that there is always light. There is always light following the darkness. There is always light growing from the darkness, growing through the darkness, awakening within the darkness. And so these dark times are simply a reminder to us to hold that idea of light for the world as well, to know that truth for everyone, not just for us, but for the whole world. So I know that we're not so churchy here. So I didn't, you know, bring out a wreath, an Advent wreath with candles that I was going to light every Sunday or anything. I thought for me, really, it's that inner observance of this time that's more important for me anyway. So for this Advent, I'm going to focus my own personal spiritual practice on those three ideas of patience, of joyful anticipation, and on an awareness of grace that is within my life and is within the world as well. And what I would like to do is just to offer you this as an idea for yourself. If this resonates with you, to find a way for yourself to honor and celebrate this time of darkness, knowing that that light is so present, is so there, is so awakening within each one of us. And as we move through these next few weeks of Advent, to just have that awareness for yourself in your life. So be a little subversive this year. Celebrate Advent and know that this is a time of